Okay, I think people are more or less ending up where we expect them to. So welcome to this session, and we're going to be talking about making the ocean interesting again. So as we said, we'll have 3 speakers, and then we'll be able to take questions and comments. So do make sure you add those in the chat kind of throughout, and I will base the discussion later on what I see in the chat. If you want to turn your video on, please feel free, but again, it's not necessary. So I'm going to go straight into the first speaker. So we're going to hand over to Mariola Norte. She's from the Sète Foundation, who is based in Spain, in the north of Spain. And she's going to talk about gamification for modeling and data. So Mariola, if you could share your screen and turn on your sound, the floor is yours. I don't think you have your sound on, sorry.
Okay.
Perfect,
ready.
thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Apologies for the sound. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all can see my screen right now. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about how to make data more interesting through gamification. So this speech is about how if you find models and data boring, how to use gamification to scratch the tedium. Right. So, well, to give you a bit of context on what we do, we are right now working on catfishment project, which is aim is conserving Atlantic biodiversity by supporting innovative small-scale fisheries co-management. So our role here is to engage with the different targets, stakeholders, and to capitalize all the results of the project. I mean, the main outputs of the project. So the main outputs that we have identified within CAFISMAN are, well, maps, scientific publications, databases, tools, methodologies, and operational data. You can explore more about the project and in the project website that you can see in this slide. So, well, why are we here today? Today, what brings us here is how to make attractive the database that we have available in CAFISMAN. So, namely, we are going to focus on the cultural and natural heritage inventory associated with small-scale fisheries, which is a database that includes a bibliography, survey, and data, and a collection of written and visual materials. So, well, the reason why we're here is that the way in which this data is presented sometimes make it hard for the interested people, for other researchers, stakeholders to find the results or the information they are looking for. So sometimes the way of doing it, it's boring or it's tedious. Well, so we thought within the project, we don't only have the databases, we also have other tools that can make more interesting the search of the results, right? So we had a geo tool with geographical information about all the cultural and natural heritage available, identified by the project. So this is the appearance of the tool. And here, what I'm presenting is the number of natural cultural heritage associated with small-scale fisheries identified in the 5 countries that are participating in the project: Ireland, UK, in France, Portugal, and Spain. Right. So once we go through the tool and we pick a place, we can zoom in and we find that there is a lot of material available. So that database made of numbers and tables are in a shape of a map in which you can pick up a place and then find all the material available, the information that may have the shape of a song, of a TV program, of a YouTube video. So I have picked this example of Carnival, in which we have a YouTube video about the traditional celebration of cephalopods in the south of Spain. Well, so with this information and with these elements that we have, this is how we started the creative process. So we have the database of natural cultural heritage with a lot of materials, reading and visuals that are not visible through those tables, but with a lot of potential as visual materials, pictures, videos, song, written text, popular traditions, gastronomy, celebrations, events. And we have the opportunity to capitalize these outputs in a way that they were accessible and usable. So the starting point was here with those three elements. Right. So, well, the first opportunity that we have to promote this content was 2 years ago in the European Maritime Day. We thought on launching a game activity, which was a treasure hunt in which we could show up all the natural cultural heritage in the North Atlantic area through a game in which the participant could experience a virtual work through the mapping of the fisheries cultural heritage and play a short treasure hunt. So the idea sounds really well, but it wasn't developed for several circumstances. But we didn't want to discard the idea. So we kept in mind the idea of having the game activity and the treasure hunt. So in the frame of the capitalization actions that we were developing in the project, in order to make the outputs accessible or usable, we thought, right, we could make this game activity in a way in which, well, it's not necessary that people play physically, but virtually, and like escape game, right? So we found that there were plenty of several examples, and we even found that there were already examples on the cultural heritage, but of course not addressed to fisheries or small-scale fisheries. This is a topic that is not have been explored for gamification. So we thought that could be a good way, having seen all the examples of several games in which we could motivate the participants, in which they could discover all the cultural heritage, all the quantitative and qualitative data available in our databases in Cafisman. So following these examples, we thought, right, so the escape room could be a good way of harnessing the attention span of younger and adults, because, well, nowadays it's very difficult to keep the attention of people for more than 5 minutes. You can see the examples in videos that are shorter and shorter each time, because it's very difficult to keep the attention of the people, even in conferences like this, you know. So we thought that could be a good way to catch their attention, talking in their same language. At the time that we recreate holistic experiences, and we get the user involved with the content through the entertainment level. So these also have the potential capacity to physically see and experience the heritage the user have virtually interacted with. It's a way, once you have discovered, okay, so, well, I didn't know that here in Vigo, where I am now, we have this celebration on the, for example, the mussels. So that could be a good way to bring people to the physical place and make them interested in discover more. But, well, this idea was based as well in science, in the scientific evidence, using this kind of mechanics, this type of resources to get to our targets. So here I show a graphic in which you can see the evolution of these publications related with gamification are increasing in the latest year. And also a specific example on how to use gamification with cultural heritage. So with this in mind, and with this all methods available and all the previous work done by scientists, we thought, okay, this is the moment to start our process. So we have the capitalization idea of the online escape room. So first, we do this exploratory research. Then we identify the key ideas and target. Then we contact a professional game developer, prepare a briefing, we conceptualize, and we have the following step in which we have to produce the game and beta testing. So right now we are in the conceptualization phase. So in this phase, we are trying to bring all the content of the database, which are examples of traditional fisheries, oral traditional social practices, traditional craftsmen and other traditional marine crafts, examples of marine games, regattas and show, gastronomy. So we have plenty of information in that Excel database that we need to give the shape of something attractive. So how to make it playable? Well, first of all, we have to work with the project researchers, with the people that have created this database, that know all the content really well, in order to identify the key elements that are going to be part of our game, to then go with the game developers, I work with them, make the script of the game, digest the content, and design the actions for the users. So who is involved in this process? As I mentioned, the researchers of the project. So our challenge here is to bring all the information that lives in the head of these researchers. In this case, what I'm bringing here is an example on how to make it what is the value of the cultural heritage. So our researchers have calculated the economic value of this heritage, and what we have to do is conceptualize to bring this concept to the users in an attractive way, in an appealing way. These are the formulas they use to calculate the economic value, but we have to digest the content and to make the public interested on the economic value of this cultural heritage and put this in a way that they are able to understand. So this is a visual example of the economic value of the cultural heritage for presenting the landscape of the game. Right. So what we have, the way forward we have is the full development of the game, presenting this kind of concept, making it playful. And once the project, the game is the escape room is finished, the virtual escape room is finished, that will be presented in the final conference of the project, which will take place next March 2023. And we have to make it available beyond the project. So if you are into gaming or cultural heritage and small scale fisheries or in fisheries in general, please contact us. Because we are very interested in keeping in touch with you and telling you what's going on with this development. So, well, managing expectations. I know that when you decided to join this session, you were thinking that you will see escape room online ready to play. But I have to say that well, that wasn't feasible, because we are on the conceptualization process. Things have gone, it's a very long process, and had taken longer than we would like. But do not worry, you will have the opportunity to see it. I'm glad to have telling you the creative process and how it was all, and how it all started. And if you are interested in what we do, we work in Centro Tecnológico del Mar in Vigo, in Spain, and in Fishman project, conserving Atlantic biodiversity by supporting innovative small-scale fisheries co-management. You can visit the website to know more about it. And just to remind you that we do engagement and capitalization the way we understand it, the outputs that are accessible and usable, and that's what we are doing with this escape room. And well, that we work as knowledge brokers, and that we are, thank you for having you listening and joining us in this session. So that's from our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariola. That was really interesting. And if anyone has any questions, please do put those in the chat. We will go straight to the next speaker, but at the end we can take questions to all three speakers and have a discussion. So our second speaker is Georgia Wells. She's linked to the Amatos Oceanic Consultancy, who is based in the UK. And she's going to talk to us about deep sea tropes or cliches. So if you could share your screen and your sound, then it's over to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paula. Let me just share my screen for everybody. Okay. Perfect. So, hi, everyone. I'm Georgia. I'm coming from Amatos Oceanic and also the Deep Sea podcast. So I'm their science communicator, and I wanted to talk a bit today about some common deep sea tropes that you often see and how we're trying to reverse those cliches and combat them and progress deep sea science in a way that is truthful and factual. So I first want you to think of imagine what you hear when you hear deep sea animals. When you're told this phrase, this deep sea fish, deep sea creature, what comes to mind? It's a similar sort of narrative you'll find if you look across media, if you look across any sort of deep sea related output, it's the same things that are continuously coming up again and again. So outside of deep sea science, potentially even in marine biology, there's the same sort of imagery that comes to mind, and it might look something like this. So this is something that's probably familiar to you, this idea of these terrifying, huge, colossal monsters that are coming from the deep. And the reason why it's familiar to you is because it's all you see when you see deep sea related species. These images aren't always too far from the truth, but they're often exaggerated quite a bit. So this is a actual deep sea fish that exists. It's a type of telescope fish. And you can see there's some similarities. They have, sharp teeth and big eyes, but there's a big difference between what is actually happening here. So these fish are often no bigger than the palm of your hand. They're not these huge monsters that exist in the deep. They're often fairly small, and they're also extremely well adapted to their conditions, which is why they look like that. So these teeth aren't there to be terrifying to humans and be a horror story sort of source of information. They're there because they live in complete darkness, and if they see some prey go past, well, maybe not see, but if they sense some prey go past, they need to be able to capture that and keep hold of that, because that could be the difference between life and death. So what we're shown isn't just there to scare us, is essentially what I'm trying to say. And I wanted to show you that these fish do exist, and I understand why they might look a bit scary, but it's not all that exists in the deep sea. It's not the whole story. So to show you a bit about another side of the deep sea that maybe you don't see as often, I have this video from YouTube of, this is some snailfish in the Mariana Trench. So the guys that found this are actually from Amatos, and this is introduce you to the world's deepest fish. So these guys are quite cute, pink and wrinkly, maybe not necessarily what you imagined when you thought of when you think of deep sea fish. They don't have the huge ferocious teeth, but that's because they didn't need to evolve to have those huge ferocious teeth. So I wanted to show you that what you're shown, you need to question sometimes and see if that is the entire picture. To quickly go into some language around the deep sea and deep sea species, you're often going to see words like aliens, monsters, creatures of the deep. These are just some headlines that I pulled up from some news articles that I Googled when I Googled deep sea fish. And it's the same sort of thing. It's the same imagery of this scary, dark place that you don't want to visit, you don't want to go to, you don't want to look after. And so overall, we have clearly a distorted view of the deep sea. We have a one-track perception, which isn't the whole story. And whilst that's great entertainment, whilst it might catch your interest for a short period of time when you watch a documentary, it doesn't make you want to look after the deep sea. It doesn't make you engaged and passionate and an advocate of the deep sea. So the point I'm trying to make is the media is constantly validating people's opinions of these deep, dark, scary monsters. That's what comes into your mind because that's what you're told. And at the end of the day, that's not progressing deep sea science. We need to change these preconceptions and we need to show people the truth in order to get people on board, in order to get people engaged. So we need to stop telling people what they want to hear, that it's not all monsters and creepy things that are huge and going to come and eat you. That's not the case in a lot of contexts. So we need to change this narrative. And so before I tell you how we're trying to do that, I wanted to remind you a little fact. So this is a deep sea planet. So I stole some of these quotes from another great talk by someone else at Armatis, but it's just a mind-blowing fact I wanted to tell you. So if you looked at the Earth's, the scope of the Earth, the height of the Earth, if you went to the highest point of Everest and the lowest point of Mariana Trench, and you took an average of the depth of our planet, of planet Earth, that comes up at 4,000 meters below sea level. So if you're an alien looking at Earth, you could very well justify that this is a deep sea planet. We live on a deep sea planet. And what's more, the deep sea is the largest habitat on Earth. So if you imagine all of the rainforests, all of the lakes, the Sahara Desert, the tundras, everything, the abyssal plains, which are essentially the muddy bottom bit of the ocean, the seafloor, that covers over half of our entire planet. So if we live on a deep sea planet, and arguably we do, why don't we care about it? And why don't we have this advocacy and this impassioned want to find out more? Why doesn't that exist? I could argue that we even go further along that spectrum. It's not even adoration for the deep sea that we have. It's the other end, and we put it in a box and we label it as scary, and we don't talk about it, and we don't want to talk about it. And it just doesn't make sense to me, because if you look out at the beautiful ocean and you see the dolphins and you see the coral reefs, which are amazing, and I understand the wonder and it's beautiful, but they're all the same ocean. It's one system. And so it's just fascinating that we have decided that part of that one cycle is just not worthy of our attention. The bottom of the ocean, the deep sea, is just as much as part of this intrinsic cycle as the surface waters. And the top surface waters depends on the bottom, and the bottom depends on the top, and it's all one system. So why did we decide that the bottom part of this cycle is just too scary, too weird, not worthy of our time? So we decided to try and change these cliches, to change these tropes, to try and tackle them head on and tell people the truth about the deep sea. And that is when we decided to start the Deep Sea Podcast. So podcasting has obviously got quite gained in popularity quite recently since the lockdown, and that's what this started as. This started as a lockdown project by two deep sea scientists in a hope to change people's perceptions and tackle these cliches. And it's a fantastic way to do science communication, because it's a refreshing way of meeting new people and gaining new audiences whilst also being yourself and being truthful, without having people changing what you're saying or altering the facts or blowing up the pictures to make them look like not quite what they are. So to give you a span of how we've come in the last 2 years and how podcasting can be for a small little independent podcast, I thought I'd run you through some podcasting facts. So in the last 2 years that we've been doing it, we've now reached 62,000 downloads, which is great. And we get about 4,500 downloads per episode per month. To give you some perspective of whether or not that's good, if you're in the top 50% of all podcasts, you get about 30 downloads per episode. So we're very surprised, but we're doing well. And it's just fantastic. We've got such a nice community that listen and engage listeners. And we tend to have two different types of people listening and giving us feedback. And that is, they always wanted to be involved in deep sea research, or not even deep sea, oceanic research. And this show makes them feel like they're now a part of that, because we talk about the news, we talk about the latest in research developments, and also we get really interesting guests to come on and talk about their research too. So they feel a part of this circle. We also get some people that say they came for the horror stories and they found out that the truth was actually way more interesting. So that's also really nice to hear that we are tackling those tropes. So overall, this community that we've built, and that you could possibly build if you wanted to start a podcast, we've connected people. So we've been able to connect academics and professionals to their dream jobs. We've had people come to us in need of rare specimens, and we've been able to connect them with people that have them. And it's just a fantastic way to link people interdisciplinarily across all of these different aspects that need deep sea science to progress. Furthermore, we have given some exposure to our parent company. So if that's the reason why you want to start a podcast to advertise the company you work for, it's a fantastic way to do that as well. And of course, we've challenged common deep sea tropes, which is always what we wanted to do. So why should you potentially start a podcast? So firstly, it's a great way to humanize scientists. Obviously, COVID-19 made it very clear that there's potentially a distrust in science and scientists, and it's a fantastic way to show people that we're just people and we're not some elite group that knows everything. We're just people and we're just passionate, and it's a fantastic way to do that. Furthermore, you can reach a unique audience. So 74% of podcast listeners actually tune in to learn new things. So they're not necessarily the experts in the field already. So it's a fantastic way to kind of step out of that echo chamber that sometimes happens with potentially, I've always seen social media kind of science communication. It tends to be the same sort of people that you're preaching to the choir almost. And again, you create engaged community by doing a podcast. So there's fantastic fundraising opportunities. We haven't yet delved into this world. We want to, but there is definitely income to be made if that's why you want to start a podcast, potentially to fund your research or to fund an NGO. That is an option there. And it also creates ocean advocates, which is what we're all here for, really. So overall, I just wanted to give some ideas about another form of science communication, another way of making the deep sea and the ocean in general more interesting. And that starts with having accurate but engaging storytelling and truth, giving the truth out there to the people so they can make their own decisions without doing the cliches, without doing the tropes. So thank you. I'll leave all of our details on here in case you want to check us out. But yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks, Georgia. That's great to get that introduction. And again, I will definitely take any questions to you. I'm taking notes. We'll take the questions to you after we've heard from our third speaker. But first of all, we will go to our third speaker, and that is Artash Nash. He's based in Canada, and he is the founder of the monitormyocean.com platform. So Artash, hopefully you can share your slides and we can see and hear you, and hopefully we're all good to go.
For sure. Thank you, Paula. Does this work?
Yep, that's all loud and clear. Go ahead.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Artash, a grade 11 student from Toronto, Canada, and it's great to be speaking at this session at the CommOCEAN conference. And I'm really excited to be sharing a bit about my work on underwater noise and the COVID-19 lockdowns. Now, as many of us know, the ocean is a very dark place. In fact, below 200 meters in depth, there's barely any light that penetrates. So when thinking about oceans at that level, sound becomes the most important factor to consider. And underwater, we can hear three different types of sounds. First, geophony. And these are the natural sounds of the earth, like ones from rain, waves, and underwater seismic events. Then we have biophony. And these are the natural sounds underwater from marine mammals, like whales, fish, and even the oxygen bubbles from aquatic plants. And finally, we have anthrophony. And this is the artificially induced noise in the water from human activity, like commercial shipping, oil exploration, and military activity. And this anthropogenic noise is what is interest of me in my research. So let's talk a bit more about shipping. So some of you may be surprised to know that over 80% of global trade happens via marine shipping routes. And as the global population increases, and international trade also goes higher, that means that there are more ships in the water. And in the past 20 years, the amount of shipping traffic by volume has nearly doubled. Now, why is this an issue? Well, ships create underwater noise. And underwater noise from ships overlaps with the frequencies that marine mammals use to communicate and navigate, to forage and to find food. So as underwater noise from ships increase, there's a higher stress on the marine mammal species, which increases the rate of whale-ship collisions. If we were to visualize all the underwater sounds and their sources underwater, then we'd see that in the lower frequencies of 1 to 10 hertz, the noise from geophony is dominant. Then, between 10 to 100 hertz, the sounds from marine shipping is dominant. And above 100 hertz, wind also starts to affect underwater noise. The issue is that what I wanted to do is to measure the contribution of shipping traffic to underwater noise. However, since shipping is rising every year, establishing a proper baseline for underwater noise is a very hard task to do. But entering the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic was a tragedy. We suffered huge economic loss and the loss of lives. However, it was also a very unique research opportunity, since for the first time, shipping traffic actually decreased. So I wanted to use the COVID-19 lockdown as an opportunity to establish a baseline of underwater noise in oceans in a decreased level of anthropogenic activity. And this would help to develop quiet ocean strategies to protect marine life. To measure underwater noise in global oceans, I turned to hydrophone stations in global observatories. Hydrophones are just underwater microphones. And to select what hydrophones to use in my study, first, I looked for these stations that were close to sources of anthropogenic activity, since I wanted to measure the changes in human activity or human-induced noise in the water. A few other criteria I considered is that these stations should be representative of global oceans, they should be operational during the pandemic and before the pandemic, and the data should be accessible. And this was a bit of a challenge since hydrophone data is pretty hard to get access to, especially in a long form format. So I'm very thankful to all the organizations I was able to write to and get in touch with for providing the data from their stations. Like in US, so it's MBARI and NOAA, Ocean Acoustics Canada in Canada, OPSI in Spain, and Ocean Acoustics in New Zealand. So once I had hold of this data, I followed a 5-step methodology to process it and extract anthropogenic noise. So first was to download these files, and as you know, for some who's worked with data before, underwater noise data and data in general from the environment is very messy. So there's a lot of steps that I had to take to clean up this data. Second was the microscale sampling. So all the data was coming at different sample rates. So I resampled everything to 2 kilohertz. So I could establish and do a standard measurement across all my data sources. Third, I separated my data into 1-minute segments for resolution purposes and applied fast Fourier transformations to obtain power spectral densities, which I then aggregated into long-term spectral averages over several years for each station to get historical data. 4, to eliminate the effect of wind on underwater noise, I only compared days in my data for which the wind speed level was similar on the Beaufort scale. And finally, after removing the effect of wind, I applied a third octave analysis to my data so I could measure underwater noise in the 63 and 125 hertz third octave bands, which are the ones that are dominated by anthropogenic noise. And I was able to compare the noise levels during the pandemic to the time before the pandemic and obtain some very interesting results. Some of the libraries I used when doing my research are shown there. So all my research was done in Python with libraries like SciPy, and I was even able to visualize my data using Plotly and Matplotlib. So result 1. First, I was able to match up the underwater noise with wind speed levels to make sure that I was successfully removing it. And as you can see in the top left diagram, the correlation between wind speed and underwater noise at the lower frequencies of my interest are very weak. And it only starts to actually affect underwater noise at the higher frequencies as shown on the right. So I plotted the mean spectral densities for each different step on the Beaufort scale, which represents wind speed. And as you can see, below 125 hertz, it's very easy to remove the effect of wind by simply removing the days with a Beaufort scale of 5. And to further reduce seasonal variation in my data, I only compared months with the same month in a previous year. So the data I was getting would purely be of the decrease in anthropogenic noise. So once I removed and cleaned my data, I was able to find decreases in underwater noise at all the stations in my study. the biggest decrease was of around 7 decibels in Georgia Strip, followed by 6.3 decibels in Raggy Total Channel, and found similar but lesser decreases during the lockdown period for all the stations of my study. To dive a bit deeper into the source of the decrease in underwater noise, I also conducted an exceedance level study and found that the sharpest decrease in underwater noise was seen in the 25% exceedance levels, which represents the louder intensity noises, which can be correlated with shipping. So this is another proof that the decrease in underwater noise I was seeing was really because of the decrease in the louder shipping noises. As a further step to confirm my results, I also compared the decrease in underwater noise with satellite-based automated identification system data, which tracks the position of ships. And it showed me that the decrease in underwater noise was most at stations that experienced a decrease in both commercial shipping as well as passenger shipping from ferries and cruise ships. So an interesting thing I saw while looking through my data was the overlap between the sounds of marine mammals and the sounds from ships in the same spectrum band. So as you can see on the top, we have the noise of shipping, which is much louder and spans way more frequencies. And then we see the noise from whale vocalization, which is lower and overlaps with this noise. So I've prepared a short video on the bottom. So in this video, first you'll hear the jarring and loud noise from ships. And in the second part of the video, you'll hear the clicks and whistles from dolphins. So I hope you enjoyed the short snippet of underwater sound that I prepared from my data. So to conclude, I was able to plot all the decreases in underwater noise I was seeing in the different stations in this table to get more of a comparative study across all the stations. And as you can see, the first decrease in underwater noise was seen in the stations in the Pacific Ocean. And this makes a lot of sense, since in the onset of the pandemic, the first trading routes to be affected were the ones between China and North America, which happened via the Pacific Ocean. And the second decrease in sound was seen a bit later in the Atlantic and Mediterranean Sea. And this also follows the pattern of the decrease in shipping routes between Europe and the Americas. And the last decrease in underwater noise was seen in Glacier Bay and Cambridge Bay later during the year. And the reason for this is that Glacier Bay and Cambridge Bay are very touristic destinations and are frequented mostly by cruise ships. And the cruise ship season happens during the summer to early fall, so that's when the decrease in underwater noise was seen. So my study has shown that strategic anthropods, like perhaps moving shipping lanes away from the migratory routes of marine mammals, and temporary moratoria on new shipping routes, like in the Arctic, is an effective strategy to reduce underwater noise and help avert the decline in the marine mammal population. So to end this presentation, a bit about the political landscape. I also created an app, monitormyocean.com, which anyone can check out. And anyone can visualize the data that I've prepared for the different stations in my study, for the different frequency bands. And I'm pleased to note the app was also endorsed by UNESCO as a UN Ocean Decade activity. So I'm continuing to work on this app, and this code is completely open source and is available on my GitHub. So please feel free to check out the website after this presentation. So back to the political landscape of ocean noise, I had the opportunity to attend the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon earlier during the summer. And there I was able to witness the political discussions that were happening on ocean noise firsthand. And the main policies that came out of the Lisbon Declaration, which I thought were most important, was the prevention and reduction of marine pollution. And it was specifically stated in the convention that underwater noise from anthropogenic activity was one of the sources of pollution that they wished to decrease. And second is the strengthening of scientific observation and data collection. And both of these things go in line with my research. Second, most of us have heard about the recent COP27 conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. And one of the really cool things that came out of this conference was they had an ocean pavilion for the first time at a climate change conference. And one of the things is that 10 shipping companies signed a Race to Zero agreement, which agreed to make all the commercial vessels zero emissions by 2030 and to fully decarbonize the shipping sector by 2050. So as we have more efficient ships, underwater noise will also decrease. And finally, there's the upcoming COP15 in Montreal, where countries will adopt the global biodiversity framework, including, which obviously will include oceans, since oceans form a large part of global biodiversity. So oceans has definitely become a very important part when talking about climate change and environment. So really, we can't have the Ocean Lisbon Declaration without Montreal and Sharm el-Sheikh. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting and definitely a very current topic as well. We will go into a discussion, but I do already see that there's a question from Ari asking if you could please add the details of the open source Monitor My Ocean app. So perhaps you could paste that in the chat and then we can all have access to see more about your platform.
Sure.
Thanks, that'd be great. Okay, I'm going to go back to Mariola first. And there was a question for you, Mariola, from Eric van Sibbel in the chat. And he was saying, really interesting presentation and project. He was wondering whether you've also thought about how to measure the outcomes and or the impact of the escape room on your target public. How can you assess whether you are reaching your goals? If you could say something about that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Eric, for your questions. So the way we have to measure the outcomes or the impact, well, in first place, we have a specific request to the game developers, that is to give the metrics of the time that people spend on each action. I mean, they can facilitate us the data of how long the people is spending on each of the activities to see if they spend a very long time, if they abandon directly the game, if they get bored, or if they are too fast or they find it easy. So that's one of the requests we have as technical request for the metrics. And then the other thing is that this is not a standalone product. So if I mentioned in the presentation, we have this geo tool that will be also available. It's going to be publicly available, and in which we can measure the traffic. So after playing the game, we can get track of if the traffic of the geo tool has increased, and specifically in the layer addressing the cultural heritage. So this is a way we have to measure this impact or the outcome. And on the other hand, we have an educational tool as well, and the escape room will be part of this educational tool, and this tool will have its own metrics, so that will let us also get track of the impact that we are getting. So this is the way to assess whether we have reached it or not our goals. But probably there are more options. For the moment, this is what we have now available and we have in mind now. Thank you.
And I think we will also, or certainly Eric will touch on this subject about impact in the last session as well. So maybe that will spark some ideas as well. So I also had a question for you about this project, and it was really about how do you plan to sort of reach out to people and tell them about this opportunity? Do you have some sort of ideas about who you will try and target and how you might try and reach them?
Yes, well, among our targets, we have divided into two main targets. So one is the general public, adults in general, and we have a strategy for the game for them. And then we have younger people from 14 to 18 years old. And the idea is to spread this tool well in the secondary schools and make it available through other institutions, public institutions, universities, and also within the fisheries organizations that are within our stakeholders. And well, the idea is to make it publicly available to all those different stakeholders at different levels.
That's great.
And we will present in and that tool we present in a knowledge brokers event as well, in which we will invite these stakeholders that have influence in other. So this is another way to spread the tool, the game.
And I imagine that actually means you'll have to have various languages or dialects available as well.
Yes, the game is going to be available in 4 languages. That are the 4 languages of the project: French, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And the player will have the opportunity to choose the language of the game.
That's great. Thank you very much. I will
You're
go to
welcome.
Georgia now, but we might well come back to you when there's more questions. So Georgia, there was a couple of questions, in fact, in the chat asking about kind of where the podcast is available and where people can find that. So maybe you could just let us know.
Of course. So we have the podcast anywhere that you can find any podcast you listen to. So we have it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud. We also have if you don't use any of those, you can also access it through our website. So you can just click on that and there's a little embedded player as well. So there's lots of different options to host your podcast if you'd like to.
Okay, perfect. And it's under Deep Sea Podcast, if I understand right.
That's right. Yeah. There's no others. So you'll know it's the right one if you find us.
Indeed, it's probably quite a niche topic, so that's useful. And that kind of leads on to one of my questions, in fact, of, it is probably the only deep sea podcast, but, there are lots of podcasts out there. And how do you get yours recognized and noticed?
Of course, I think a lot of podcasts exist, especially every single year. There's thousands and thousands more. I believe if you're genuinely passionate and you have a lot to say about a certain topic, that carries through. And at the end of the day, a lot of people start to engage in parasocial relationships with the podcasters. So it's quite intimate having someone speak directly into your ears. So I feel like if you have enough content of a topic, if you're particularly important about, if you're doing it on behalf of a charity or an NGO potentially, that's a really great way of getting people on board, because it's very transparent. And I think that helps with getting a genuine engaged audience, is when they actually like you as a person. And if you're passionate and enjoying what you're doing, that will translate through.
Yeah, I can indeed believe that. And the sort of link to that, there was a question from Eric Van Sebel again. And he was saying, quite a lot of podcasts are really focused on sending information out. And have you thought about how to kind of engage in a more interactive discussion with your audiences? And if you do that already, or perhaps you have some ideas how that could be done?
Absolutely. So on the podcast, at least now, we are really happy to have people send in voice notes, and we often play them. We have previously mentioned things or discussed things, and we have had listeners get in touch and say that actually that's not true, and we discussed it more on the show. And I think because we tend to have a big academic audience, or at least very impassioned, engaged ocean advocates, people are very keen to get involved. So if anyone has any comments, please send them in. We love talking about them on the show. We would like to do more sort of live streamy events where it's a lot more conversational, like round table style settings. But at the moment, I don't feel like we have a big enough base, like a big enough listener base to do that. So maybe that's in the future something to go into for sure. But I think it's a really important point that it's very easy to preach the podcasts and not take any responses back and actually consider them. But I definitely think it's important for a podcast to not just see themselves as the truth, like keep the conversation going. And I think in an academic sense, if that's the way that you were potentially doing a podcast, it is great to sort of get these discussions happening between the community, and it kind of progresses science in that way as well, when you're having you're open to having conversations about things like that. But yeah, good question.
Yeah, indeed. And then there was a question from Yulia Polkova, who was asking about how you fund the podcast. And I mean, kind of linked to that, and because you were very encouraging about people starting podcasts, kind of more widely, what's involved in putting something like that together? I mean, what scope of effort are we looking at here?
Sure. So it varies hugely. So my role as science communicator, a big part of my job is helping to make the podcast. So it's funded almost like it's my job to do that. But there are so many different options for funding. So we haven't started the sponsorship journey yet. It's something that we are looking into, and we have been really transparent and honest, and we need to start thinking about how we're funding the podcast, because at the moment it's very much a passion project rather than a income project. But obviously everything needs support. So we're looking into the sponsors route down of things, and that is a minefield, but a lot of podcasts make a very healthy income from sponsors. So I know that's an option if you wanted to look into funding. What's involved with creating a podcast? So what's amazing is there's such a big range of podcasts. So we do one a month, which means we have to reach out to a guest. So usually an academic, a scientist, or an engineer, or someone in the industry. The recording process is fairly simple. The editing takes quite a while, but it depends how engaged you want to be. There are some podcasts that do very minimal editing. They just talk freely and, you know, maybe clip bits here and there. We're a lot more perfectionist, I would say, and I personally enjoy that. It's a lot nicer to hear when you have like good production and good equipment. You don't need that to start. You can always see the reception you get if you put something out there. But yeah, it depends. There are some podcasters that put something out every week, which that's a lot of work. But yeah, it is a big project. But as I said, if you have something to say, then it kind of comes quite naturally. It's just getting it out there together. But yeah.
That's great, thanks. I think we will go to Artash first, and then we'll come back to yourself and Mariola for any later questions. So Artash, I don't know if you already saw in the chat, if you're still there. I don't know if I see you. Perhaps he's having a cup of tea or something. Okay, well then I'll go back to the question to you, Georgia, while we're waiting for Artash to appear. So Eric was asking, how do you decide on the fraction of scientists versus other experts on the show? And do you see a difference between how scientists' appearances are appreciated compared to other professionals, stakeholders, or experts?
We honestly don't have a strict formula for it. We kind of have an idea of where we want to take the episode, and then we kind of sense who would be interesting to talk to. And we don't always go with the obvious name. We don't always go with the head of a topic, because sometimes it's interesting to hear the stories of other people. So not necessarily scientists. We've had really exciting episodes with artists who got invited on expeditions, and they created some art from the expedition. And it's interesting. People are actually not a hard and fast rule. They're really engaged with the curveball people that we invite on. I think it's because it's really hard to know who's involved in the industry unless you're told. There are so many different roles. There are so many different disciplines that are involved in ocean advocacy and ocean science that I think their imagination sparked by having people that aren't necessarily scientists. Yes, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much. I think we'll go back to Mariola, because I don't see Artash online, but if you are there, Artash, do pop up and we'll oh, he is there. Sorry. Okay, I'll go to you first, and then we'll go back to Mariola. So I don't know if you saw, but Ari Winfield says thank you very much for providing the link. And he was also saying that he's involved in something quite similar, and he's provided a link to a project they're involved in. So perhaps you can check that out. And I also had a question. So how do you kind of talk about this platform that you've created, about this initiative, to other people? Like, what kind of things do you use to promote it and explain it to others who might not be so familiar with underwater noise?
Sorry, your audio cut out. I think my connection is.
Sorry. Okay, no, I'll repeat the question. No worries. So what kind of how do you present this initiative that you've created to other people? How do you introduce them to this idea of underwater noise if they're not so familiar, and kind of explain to them why it's interesting?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So, underwater noise is definitely, in my opinion, an underrated kind of issue because when we think of ocean pollution, underwater noise is definitely not one of the first thing that comes to most of our minds. So, I think one of the best ways to communicate the issue of underwater noise first, is to use relevant examples that humans experience, right? So it's easier to put underwater noise into perspective by talking about, for example, you're not able to, for example, hear someone else if you're in a very loud concert or in a very loud setting. And also talking about underwater noise, I guess, is a broader topic. So talking a bit more about how marine mammals produce sound, as well as why they do it. Like in the video I had shown during my presentation, the noises from the marine mammals. So they're clicks and whistles. So talking a bit more about those, like dolphins are very, very social animals. Each one of them has their own unique kind of whistle signature. And the clicks are used, as echolocation clicks to understand their environment and to find prey. So I think that, elaborating on exactly how marine mammals produce sounds is one of the main ways I use to, communicate more about the ocean sound thing. And to give it, a bit of a more public thing, that's why I created the app, Monitor My Ocean, and try to present it at, several conferences like this one to talk more about and capitalize the underwater noise issue.
That's great, thank you. And what kind of engagement do you get on the platform? Are you getting a good mix of visitors, and is it mostly people based also in Canada, or is it quite an international audience that you're getting?
It's international, so it gets hits from, so a lot of them are from the States and Europe, as well as Canada. But otherwise there are also hits from several other countries. Like usually after I present at a conference at a certain venue, then I'll get a lot of hits from there as well. So those three countries mainly, but really it's international. I'd like to bring it to an even more international audience in the future.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And kind of building on that, so Eric was asking, how do you see this project developing in the future, and do you think it can be expanded further?
For sure. Yeah, thank you for your question. So I have two paths to expand my project at the moment. So the first one is to understand more about the marine mammal sounds. So in my study, I was able to quantify the reductions in underwater noise from shipping activity. But now I want to dive a bit deeper in understanding how exactly marine mammal sounds got affected during this period, right? Were the vocalizations of marine mammals louder? Or were there any new interesting patterns that we could see during the pandemic that we were otherwise not able to see during regular periods of shipping traffic? And a second thing I'd like to do is a bit more on the policy international side. It's very hard to get access to hydrophones, and they're very expensive to run. So I'd like to work with organizations in developing countries, especially on the coasts of South America and South Africa, which are frequented by a lot of ships, but do not have effective noise strategies. So to work with them to develop them and to set up an efficient way to measure underwater noise and bring this to a more international thing, since underwater noise does not respect national boundaries. So all countries need to work together to find effective noise reduction strategies.
That's great. And kind of linking to the international idea, it's great that your work is being endorsed by the Ocean Decade. Do you think this has also helped you sort of reach out to newer audiences and develop your work by promoting it through the Ocean Decade? Do you think that's made a difference?
For sure. I think having it being endorsed by the UN Decade, it also gives it a wider reach and a better platform to be able to reach out to people, and having it on their platform and also being able to use the logo and so on have definitely helped in promoting the site and the project.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'll go to one more question to Mariola, and then I'll have a final question for all three of you. So Mariola, I was in fact intrigued about how you came up with the idea of sort of an escape room concept. I have not seen this in science before. I don't know if you came across it somewhere, based on science, or whether this was a kind of new idea.
First of all, the idea came from this treasure hunt that we thought, well, we have maps and we have a lot of interesting treasures hidden in those maps that people needs to see. But it's true that the inspiration came with Escape Room, that our colleagues from the Oceanographic Institute, Spanish Oceanographic Institute, launched a escape room to celebrate their I don't know, the year, 20 years anniversary or something like that. And that was really catching. And we thought, why we don't use it for giving to visualize the outputs of the project, and not to give ourselves institution, I don't know, things about the institution, making less institutional, just giving this scientific perform and focus. So that was all the mix of elements that make us to come up with that idea.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these things kind of pop up, you know. Sometimes you can have these great plans and sometimes you just go, wait, this sounds really fun, like maybe we should do this. If we find it fun, then maybe someone else will.
Yeah,
and I'm actually
I hope
gonna
so.
ask this question to both yourself and Georgia, because I think Artash has to go now. So thank you very much, Artash. It's been great to hear from you, and good luck with developing the platform further. We look forward to seeing that. So to both of the two of you, kind of, have you got a lesson learned on, you know, I think they've discussed quite a lot in the conference, not just about, you know, what's worked, but maybe something that was less successful than you expected it to be, because we can still learn very much from kind of, you know, mistakes or things that weren't as effective as we thought they were. So I don't know, Mariola, if you have something that you thought maybe was going to work but didn't.
Well, first of all, the timing, you know, when it's something that is out of your reach, because, well, we are expert in communication, okay, but we are not expert in game development, and it takes time to get all the elements, to get the professional. And we also work in a public foundation, so it also has its own internal timing. So it all makes, is the lesson learned that, well, you have to plan with a long time in advance and have this how do I say, well, to be ready for all the unexpected issues that can come up, and make it slower than you expected. Of course, when you are working in a project with deadlines, if the project is finished, you have to present the tool before the project's end. It is very important.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is a very valuable lesson, and I think it applies across so many things as well. You know, it's one thing to be familiar with a concept, but if you're not familiar, it is very challenging. And Georgia, same question to you. Have you had some sort of lessons learned from your experiences?
I feel like it's very easy to let like the numbers, like the figures, kind of paint how it's going, paint how the project's going. And I feel like it's important to detach yourself sometimes from the numbers, because, for example, whilst the podcast, we have a lot of listeners and we have a lot of followers of the podcast, our social media isn't the largest social media page in the world. And sometimes I get myself down of like, oh, why don't we have as many people following our Twitter pages? And it's because you've got a different audience. And I feel like it's important to not determine how it's going based on some follower count. It's important to remember that the people that are listening do care and are engaged, which is important, rather than just having, an X amount of numbers on a page. So don't let follower counts get you down.
Yeah, indeed. I think that kind of comes back to Eric's point at the beginning about how you measure and impact, and it's not just one set of metrics, it's taking on a wider range of things that you use. And I see that Eric's also added a couple of links in the chat that links to escape rooms and things like that. So feel free to check those out as well. So we're unfortunately coming to the end of it, what I found a very interesting session, and I hope everyone has enjoyed it as much as I have. If you do still have questions and comments, do still put them in the chat. We'll take a copy and we can maybe put connections together on email if we need to address those later. In the meantime, we're going to, in a minute, to go to a half-an-hour break. And then at 3 o'clock Central European time, we will reconvene in the plenary And we'll have a final closing session where we'll hear from 2 keynote speakers. Again, we'll have the opportunity to engage in some discussion. So in the meantime, if you haven't already looked at the online exhibition that I introduced earlier, so those 8 initiatives that have got videos and posters, I've just put the link in the chat again, so do feel free to have a look at those, see what's going on there, see what other people are working on, and perhaps submit your own for the next edition. So thank you very much, everybody. I'll leave you to go and have some coffee and a bit of a walk around, and we'll see you again at 3 o'clock.